CCP warns of foreign biotax as multiple viruses cause outbreaks. Canadian helicopter narrowly avoids midair shoot-down by rogue Chinese fighter jet. Experts dismiss China's claim to ban forced organ harvesting. House Republican introduces bill to block CCP influence at State Departments. Western Australian Premier announces visit to China. CCP warns of foreign biotax as multiple viruses cause outbreaks. Hospitals across China have been overwhelmed with patients suffering from respiratory illnesses in recent weeks. Large numbers of adults and children are reporting fevers, coughs, sore throats, and other COVID-19-like symptoms. Chinese state media reports pediatric clinics, fever centers, and infusion rooms are flooded with patients diagnosed with mycoplasma pneumonia, influenza, COVID-19, norovirus, and other viruses. The influx has strained medical resources. Meanwhile, China's Ministry of National Security recently published an article warning about biosecurity threats from foreign countries. It claimed foreign groups are trying to collect Chinese genetic samples and data on biological species distribution. The article said small genetic differences can distinguish races and potentially be used to develop genetic weapons targeting specific racial groups. It called for vigilance against such outside threats. Observers believe a new wave of COVID-19 has hit China, and authorities are starting a propaganda effort to shift blame externally. After abandoning zero-COVID policies in December 2022, China saw a massive outbreak that killed many elderly with white lung symptoms. Since then, each time hospitals are overwhelmed with similar respiratory illnesses, authorities have labeled them flu, neuro, or now mycoplasma pneumonia instead of COVID-19. Mandatory PCR testing has ended. COVID-19 was originally called Wuhan pneumonia in China when it first emerged in late 2019. Some believe it leaked from a Wuhan lab known for gain-of-function research on coronaviruses collected from bats. The Chinese regime's warnings about foreign biothreats and gene collection efforts have been seen in state media. Commentators believe this shows authorities know about the outbreak and are preemptively deflecting blame externally, likely toward the U.S. The CCP has previously accused the U.S. of collecting genetic data from Chinese and other ethnicities, with lack of transparency and press freedom in China. Full details of the respiratory illness outbreaks remain unclear, but the reported symptoms, hospital overloads, and authorities' propaganda point to COVID-19, again raging across China, contrary to the CCP's claims of containing the virus. Canadian helicopter narrowly avoids midair shoot-down by rogue Chinese fighter jet. A Chinese military jet dangerously fired flares near a Canadian military helicopter in international airspace over the South China Sea last Sunday. The Canadian Navy said the Chinese actions were reckless and could have caused the helicopter to crash. The incident happened when a Sikorsky Cyclone helicopter from the Canadian frigate HMCS Vancouver was searching for a submarine it had previously detected. The helicopter encountered Chinese J-11 fighter jets twice that day, coming within 100 feet on the second encounter. The first encounter occurred 34 nautical miles outside the contested Paracel Islands in the northern South China Sea. The second encounter was 23 nautical miles outside the islands. At the time, the Vancouver was operating 160 km east of the Paracels in international waters. Earlier that day, a J-11 had intercepted the Canadian helicopter at 3,000 feet in a straight, level flight to indicate non-hostile intent. But during the first encounter, the J-11 circled and caused turbulence that endangered the helicopter. To end the encounter, the helicopter descended to 200 feet, uncomfortable for jets. The Canadian aircrew was training to deal with such intercepts and would continue flights in international airspace over the South China Sea. The 1.3 million square mile South China Sea is vital for international trade, with a third of global shipping passing through it annually, worth trillions of dollars. It also has extensive fishing areas that many livelihoods depend upon. In 2016, An international tribunal in The Hague ruled that China had no legal basis to claim sovereignty over most of the South China Sea. But China has ignored the ruling. This was not the first dangerous intercept by Chinese jets over the South China Sea. On October 24, a Chinese J-11 dangerously maneuvered near a U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber at night, coming within 10 feet of collision. The Pentagon said the Chinese pilot's actions violated international aviation rules and norms. Since fall 2021, Pentagon officials say Chinese planes have conducted nearly 200 unsafe or unprofessional maneuvers near U.S. aircraft. In around 200 intercepts, Chinese pilots came within 15 feet, dumped chaff, and made obscene gestures, including Allies encounters. China may have intercepted foreign aircraft 300 times. Experts dismiss China's claim to ban forced organ harvesting. The Vietnamese Communist Party recently passed revisions to regulations on human organ donation and transplantation, claiming to strengthen legal protections and traceability. However, experts are skeptical given the party's history of forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience. Former USCIRF Chair Katrina Lantos Sweat said the CCP are liars and people should not be fooled by their words. She pointed to the party's past persecution of Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs, including forced organ harvesting. The practice of forcibly harvesting organs from Falun Gong Gatanese first came to light in 2006. In recent years, evidence has emerged of organ harvesting being extended to Uyghurs as well. In March 2020, the China Tribunal in London concluded that forced organ harvesting has occurred on a significant scale across China for years, with Falun Gong practitioners likely being a major source. Persecution of Uyghurs and medical testing was a more recent development. The tribunal also found the short organ transplant waiting times advertised by Chinese hospitals were highly unusual. There was ample evidence China's newly established voluntary donor system could not supply organs in such high volumes. Sweat said organ transplant ads from China can be found around the world, offering surgery within weeks, unlike the months or years normally waited elsewhere. This indicates prisoners and prisoners of conscience are being used as an organ source. Several Chinese transplant centers advertise average wait times of just 1-2 weeks for organs. Sweat said forced organ harvesting is an atrocity and crime against humanity that the world should actively oppose. USCIRF Vice Chair Frederick Davey told Epoch Times that forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience could never be legitimized, regardless of regulations passed. He called the practice ugly and appalling. Davey said the U.S. could impose targeted global Magnitsky Act sanctions on individuals and entities engaged in ongoing forced organ harvesting. The practice of extracting organs from living prisoners of conscience is reprehensible and can never be made legal, he emphasized. House Republican introduces bill to block CCP influence at State Department's House Homeland Security Committee. Chairman Mark Green has introduced legislation aimed at preventing Chinese influence over the State Department. The bill, called the No CCP Consultants Act, would stop the Secretary of State from hiring contractors that have ties to the Chinese government. The bill specifically names entities like the Chinese military, intelligence agencies, and companies sanctioned for supporting China's military industry. It would ban contractors that have worked with those entities in the past year from getting State Department contracts. The legislation also requires contractors to disclose any work with Chinese entities over the past 5 years when bidding for State Department jobs. Any organization under the control of the Chinese Communist Party would be prohibited as well. Green says the bill will protect sensitive materials at the State Department from Chinese espionage. He argues that firms linked to the CCP should not be trusted with the State Department's classified data, intelligence, and personal information on millions of Americans. Concerns about Chinese spying were highlighted when a Chinese surveillance balloon flew over the U.S. in February. Chinese hackers also stole thousands of emails from the State Department recently, when Blinken was in talks with Beijing. The Justice Department has ramped up efforts against Chinese infiltration in recent years. This includes charges against researchers for intellectual property theft and counterintelligence cases against officials accused of sending secrets to China. One example is Liu Cixing, a Chinese national sentenced to 70 months for stealing thousands of files on U.S. missile and drone systems from his New Jersey employer to illegally export to China. Green says any consultant or firm that's worked with an adversarial government should be barred from the State Department, given the stakes. If passed, the Secretary of State would have to update acquisition policies to implement the contractor ban. The State Department declined to comment on the pending legislation. Green argues the bill will protect national security by keeping CCP-linked contractors away from sensitive State Department materials and data. Western Australian Premier announces visit to China. Western Australian Premier Roger Cook will embark on his first official visit to China from November 20 to 24, 2023 to strengthen economic and political ties. As leader of the state, Ms. Cook aims to promote Western Australia's profile and forge new opportunities for investment, trade and aviation links during meetings with Chinese authorities and industry leaders. China is Western Australia's largest trading partner, absorbing 55% of the state's exports in the 2022 to 2023 financial year. The Premier's mission comes after recent visits to China by other Australian state and federal labor leaders, including Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's trip to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier in November. Mr. Cook's four-day itinerary includes visiting Xi'an province in southwest China, home to 83 million people. He will promote tourism, international education, and aviation links. In Shanghai, the Premier has scheduled meetings with resources, aviation, and energy sector investors to discuss potential Chinese investment. Direct flights between China and Australia are also on the agenda. Western Australian government said Mr. Cook will undertake high-level meetings with key Chinese officials to help raise the profile of WA in China and to deepen the bilateral relationship. The Premier stated the mission presents an exciting opportunity to build Western Australia's profile in China and showcase our strengths. He emphasized the mutually beneficial relationship between Western Australia and China, which has created thousands of local jobs and a long investment and trade history. China has been the state's largest export market for goods for 17 consecutive years. As Premier, Mr. Cook will engage with the Chinese Communist Party, which controls all arms of government, the courts and military in one-party China. The Australian government maintains there are opportunities in the economic relationship with China, but has ongoing disagreements over human rights, foreign interference, and security issues. Mr. Cook said deepening ties is a priority on his maiden mission as Western Australia Premier. It remains to be seen whether he can strengthen relations with Chinese authorities at a time of heightened tensions between Beijing and Canberra.